Hello everyone. I am going to probably just take my time a bit instead of trying to condense this into a short video or some parts of short videos and just put it as a video because there's a lot that happened for me yesterday when I was doing some research, a lot of research that was really, really, really interesting. And it's been such a theoretical roller coaster finding out about empire and the history of how the British Empire was created and how by theory and then by law how the Holy Roman Empire initially created sub-empires by monarchy under imperial order, and then they would be sovereign, as in they would administer themselves in their realm, which they were already doing with their municipalities in Germany by 1480, which I'll show you, like in Groningen. And I know this is just a rant straight off the bat, but my head is so full of information that I'm just going straight for it. So they first started with that, and then they moved to the humanist thought. So they used Rosicrucianism, Plato's works, the transcribing of Plato's works through Medici, which was under the emperor, under Maximilian, that was encouraged to be transcribed, and the Enlightenment started to occur. That happened for political imperial reform, to be able to justify what was to come, that they brought in a new Christian belief, either Lutheranism, or is it Lutheranism or Lutheran? Martin Luther was just an asset. And that then created Protestantism because Henry VIII tried to use this psyop, believe it or not, a psyop, back then, to create the new Christianity that would rule England. Because what was happening was, by I think early to mid 15th century, so I think around 1430, they were creating all these sovereign, the notion of sovereign monarchies and sub-empires, because they wanted to separate themselves from the Vatican. Now, when you think of that history, and I'm questioning it and challenging it myself now, there's so many thoughts within thoughts. So I've always thought that that was because they were annoyed at having to go through canon law. I've gone through the Latin letters of the popes when Maximilian's father was still alive, how they would want to elect archbishops, and they would have to go through canon law, and there was and when you think of centralizing governance and your administration spreading thin already, where you're already appointing like governors to govern municipalities through chivalric orders, then so you can kind of keep the empire, because you don't want to, you're trying not to kill all the, you're trying to govern all these places, but you don't want the admin costs, right? Let's just say that in layman's terms. And so that's why they appoint governors and so forth. So there was that issue where how can they centralize control or rule better and then expand this empire into this central governance, what we see today? How can they do that and move forward to what will then be nation states by the Treaty of Westphalia after the 30 Years' War that I keep talking about? How can they do all of that and start that ball, that wheel turning, if they have the canon law and the Pope having to administer all these things? So it could have been simply an administration issue, and the way to centralize was to create sub-empires, which would be the swords of the sword. They will decentralize the sword of the dual system of the empire, rather than it being the Holy Roman Empire anymore, which was really Charlemagne. That was the sword of the empire initially. He was the army that defeated the Lombards for the Pope, and the spiritual authority was always with the Pope. But they were changing that. They were going to create a new Christianity, which they did through Rosicrucianism, Lutheranism or Lutheran, and then Protestantism, to be able to decentralize the sword and move the sword from the Holy Roman Empire to all these sub-empires like England, etc., etc., and keep the spirit, instead of being with the Pope and the Vatican. The spirit will now be directly under the empire. So that's what they did. It could have been simply an administration issue, or it could have been the first step to making the Vatican invisible in its imperial governance. Does that make sense? Yeah, because, soon enough, the next step was to make the Holy Roman Empire invisible by creating these nation states. Well, really, before that, it was even creating these sub-empires, like the it wasn't the British Empire yet, but it was the English Empire under Henry VIII, and he even called himself a Roman emperor. Initially, that wasn't what they were talking about until it developed with humanist thought and Plato's works to make it as though these emperors were independent completely. Because if you were to ever Google or ChatGPT or whatever, show me proof that the Holy Roman Empire governed England or Britain, you won't ever get that. It was not meant to be like that. And I really tie that back to the whole reason why Rome fell. It didn't fall, but it fell under the West, through Britannica. It fell, and it failed. It failed in its governance and the way it was structured in Britain. And I think it ties it back to that they didn't ever want Britain or Henry VIII to look like he was subordinate. And that even happened with Charlemagne. He trained the first King Egbert, who unified Britain before Athelstan. He was trained in his court, and this was during the years between winning the war and becoming the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He went into exile, Egbert, and he went over to Charlemagne's court and really was taught and educated and conditioned, just like, we see throughout history, this consistent pattern. So that was how they governed, how, let's say, Rome or the Holy Roman Empire governed. I have always been questioning, I've always separated the idea of Rome and Holy Roman Empire because of the Lombardi family coming into power. But I'm now understanding that, there was a difference between the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire of Rome. The Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, still remained. And there's things that are coming into an understanding where I feel like the spirit of the Roman Empire still permeated through the pilgrims, through the Pope at the time, who worked through and infiltrated Britain still. And you think, like, when Rome fell in Britain, did they just take away their governance? Like, who actually then conquered? Or was it that they had the Saxons come in and govern? Like, how did that exactly work, kind of thing? And then you think about the Pope and bringing Catholicism into and infiltrating spiritually Britain, and just how they may have worked through Britain to kind of reconquer it and strategize a new political governance, a new way to govern it without it collapsing again, the governance structure, not the actual empire, if that makes sense. Sorry, massive rant. But this is just a rant, and this is me going off my thoughts and what I've come to understand. That I think there is definitely, like, I'm looking at these letters in Latin and in German, around Frederick's, right at the end of Frederick's reign, and they name themselves the Roman Emperor, Frederick and Maximilian. That's never discussed in our education or our history, and I think there's a clear intention now with historical correction that they try to separate the Roman empires, as in the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, by saying the Holy Roman Empire, because in truth and in essence, there was no difference at the time. And that's really interesting. I initially, I've always justified it with, oh yeah, they're just cosplaying. these emperors are, in the Holy Roman Empire cosplaying, but they wouldn't. It would be called the Holy Roman Empire. There'd be no reason to feel like they were a continual. There'd be really no reason other than propaganda, which is silly. Like, no one would want that to sell themselves as a continuation of the Roman Empire, of Constantine, of Caesar. In the triumphant arch of Maximilian, Albert Durer's picture I've shown you of basically this hermetic emperor who's restructuring and reforming this entire imperial structure. He calls himself, I think, the new Caesar. And he's on he's in a Roman chariot. And you always think, well, is this like romanticism and fascination and obsession with ancient Rome and trying to live out Rome? But then you had the Pope there and you had the system, and Rosicrucianism falls back to ancient Roman faith, back when ancient Rome, before, Christianity took wing, when they were praying to the planets, that is the same faith as Rosicrucianism. Christianity is just kind of like a guise, a public face. This is the ancient faith. It's meant to be the umbrella of all faiths, Rosicrucianism. That's why I say it's interfaith, and why it just doesn't matter, because it's meant to be an imperial faith where you can imperially govern all these different sub-empires: Muslim, Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic. You can have a Jesuit order for the Catholics, and you can have a Freemason order for the Protestants, all under Rosicrucianism, because it brings it back to the first ancient faith of man, even before all the Abrahamic phase. And that's why Charles sees, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity as one of the same thing, because they're all Abrahamic faiths. So yeah, that's another rant. So let's get back to kind of what I was discovering yesterday. Interesting stuff. I won't include the videos that I've done, but I went through initially. I found some things you just find randomly. So I started to look into the last Austro-Hungarian emperor, Karl, Emperor Karl, who was of the Habsburg line, and how even now the Habsburg dynasty, is still ceremonially named King of Jerusalem. So, and that dates back to the First Crusades in the year 1099. And you think how the absolute, I want to swear, but because I usually do, how did they keep this role, this title, when Saladin then conquered Jerusalem, and then the Ottoman Empire, and then Britain, in the 1900s, and when the Austro-Hungarian Empire actually closed or dissolved. How have they been able to keep these titles? And they always, of course, say it's ceremonial, da 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 da. And then you find out, they're still like dukes, or they have titles in Ukraine and Romania and all that area of Galicia, and is it Londomeria or Lodomeria? I can't remember exactly. I'll show you in a moment. So that was really, really interesting. I mean, just read between the lines. And then we went through how they still have their chivalric orders that they're grand masters of as well. So the Golden Fleece, and we'll talk about the Golden Fleece a lot, or maybe not, but I'll bring it back up. The Golden Fleece and St. George as well. That they're still grand masters of those orders and of that, because they're the dynasty, the family dynasty that basically, installed it or legitimized it through Maximilian. So it's really, really interesting. I found it really interesting. So we started there. Of course, the sunburst badge of the Holy Roman Empire, You see that there, the sunburst of the Jesuit order. Now this is the current, I want to say emperor, the current Habsburg Duke, Archduke, the one that's in charge of the Habsburg dynasty. He is wearing, I don't know if I can show you, but in like that coin area of that collar, that shows the Golden Fleece. So that's still the Order of the Golden Fleece, and it's got the Holy Roman Empire crest that he's wearing as well. So I'm sure you have already read that stuff. But this ties into what I want to talk about now, which is how the British Empire was established. And I'm going to just read off my little summary that I've done. And that's probably why I sometimes sound quite monotone, because I'm trying to summarize it without having to keep you here for 2 hours. So this is when I think the Golden Fleece was offered to Maximilian, or the painting that represents that, when he legitimized his chivalric orders to be able to govern and administer basically countries and municipalities that they didn't want to directly administer. They then used these knighthoods and these orders to be able to keep allegiance or governance under empire, by allocating these administrative duties to governors and so forth, and kings. That's Maximilian. He's wearing the Order of the Golden Fleece. So that sheep that looks dead and just hanging there, yeah, That's supposedly an honor. I don't know what the... Now, this is Henry